All right, so let's rewind the clock back to like 1912 for a second. Teddy Roosevelt, Bull Moose himself, is charging into the presidential race as a third-party candidate. And get this, he actually snagged a pretty surprising chunk of the vote. The most ever for someone outside the big two, in fact. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Why does American politics seem so glued to the Democrats and Republicans? It's like this political tug-of-war that's been going on forever.
It really is fascinating how this two-party system is so deeply rooted in our history. And you're right, it's not just a recent thing either. We're talking centuries here.
We're diving deep into your audio file on this very topic today.
Yeah.
And it's incredible how much history is crammed in there. Think of it as your express lane to understanding political parties in the U.S., where they came from, how they've morphed over time,
Yeah.
and maybe even some hints about where they might be heading next.
Basically, we'll be tracing the origins and evolution of this two-party system, going all the way back to the very beginnings, even before the Democrats and Republicans as we know them today.
Because believe it or not, political parties in the U.S. are actually way older than you might think. Get this, they actually predate the Democrats and Republicans,
Yeah.
going all the way back to Founding Fathers.
That's right. And here's the funny thing. The Founding Fathers initially weren't too keen on the idea of parties at all. They saw them as divisive and a threat to unity.
Talk about irony, right? They were against parties, but then they went ahead and formed them. What happened there?
Well, you see, it's a classic case of even the brightest minds getting swept up in the messy reality of politics. Back then, the big debates revolved around things like Alexander Hamilton's financial plans, particularly the National Bank, and America's stance in the war between France and Great Britain.
Oh, I bet that was a tough one.
Yeah.
Picking sides between your revolutionary buddy or your economic powerhouse. Imagine the pressure.
Exactly. It was a defining moment for the young nation, and those early disagreements really did end up shaping the course of American history. That's where we see the emergence of the first major players in this partisan game, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans.
Okay, so break that down for me. Who are these guys and what were they all about?
The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, were all about a strong central government. They championed Hamilton's financial plans and generally favored closer ties with Great Britain. Think of them as the pro-business, pro-establishment faction of the time.
Got it. So who are they battling it out with?
Their rivals were the Democratic Republicans, with Thomas Jefferson as their leading figure. They were more skeptical of a powerful central government and leaned towards states' rights. They also sympathized with France and the ideals of the French Revolution. You could say they were the more populist, anti-elitist group.
Interesting. So two very different visions for the future of the nation. No wonder they butted heads.
Exactly. And these early clashes laid the groundwork for the emergence of the political parties we know today. Out of this cauldron of competing ideas and interests, the granddaddy of them all took shape. The Democratic Party. And get this, it's officially the oldest continuously operating political party in the world.
Wow, I had no idea it went back that far.
Yeah.
That's quite a legacy. So how did the Democrats come to be?
Well, the Democrats emerged as a coalition of groups who felt like they were on the outside looking in. They weren't part of the established power structure, the elite. You could say they were the original outsiders of American politics.
Interesting. So they were uniting against a common enemy, those in power. Was that the key to their success?
It was certainly a factor, but there was more to it than just that. One of the masterminds behind he understood that to gain power, you needed to unite a diverse group of people, even those with competing interests.
Ah, so it was about building bridges, finding common ground even amidst differences. That makes sense.
Precisely. And Van Buren was a master at this. Think about it. He managed to unite Northerners from states that had abolished slavery alongside the slaveholding South. That's no small feat, considering the tensions of the time.
Wow, that really highlights his political savvy. Bringing those factions together under one banner must have taken some serious skill.
Absolutely. He even organized the first Democratic National Convention in 1832. This was a strategic move to showcase nationwide support for Andrew Jackson's re-election bid. Talk about a power play.
He knew how to make a statement. So were the Democrats focused on specific issues? Or was it more about uniting these outgroups?
Well, it's interesting how the issues that spark a party's creation often fade over time. But the party itself can endure. Take the debate over the Second Bank of the U.S., for example. It was a hot-button issue back then, but it's irrelevant today. Yet the Democratic Party, which was formed in the heat of that debate, lives on.
So it's like the party becomes bigger than the issues that birthed it. it takes on a life of its own.
Exactly. It evolves, adapts, and finds new issues to champion as the times change, and that's one of the keys to understanding the longevity of the two-party system. But that's a story for later.
Okay, so we've got the Democrats representing the outsiders, this diverse coalition. But who are their rivals? Who are they going up against? So who are they going up against? Who is the other side of this political coin?
Well, the main rivals of the Democrats were the Whigs. And their name's actually pretty interesting. It comes from a 17th century British anti-monarchist party.
Huh, a British import. I never knew that. So were they like American revolutionaries around too, fighting against the power of the king, or in this case, the president?
Not exactly. They weren't against the presidency itself, but they did oppose Andrew Jackson and his policies. They believed in a more active role for the national government, particularly in areas like infrastructure development. They championed what was known as the American system.
Okay, hold on. The American system, that sounds pretty important. What exactly was that all about?
It was a plan for economic development, championed by Henry Clay, one of the leading figures of the Whig Party. It involved things like protective tariffs to support American industries, investments in infrastructure like roads and canals, and a national bank to stabilize the currency.
So they were all about building up the nation, strengthening its economy,
Yeah,
and connecting it through infrastructure, kind of like a proto-New Deal.
you could see it that way. They believed in a strong national government to guide the country's economic growth.
Interesting. But you said earlier that the Whigs were often defined by what they were against rather than what they were for. That seems kind of, well, negative. Didn't it make it hard for them to create a clear identity?
That's a good point. It's true that they were often in the position of reacting to the Democrats rather than setting their own agenda. It can make it a bit tricky to get a firm grasp on their ideology.
So were they just playing defense all the time? Was there anything they stood for besides just being anti-Jackson?
Well, to be fair to the Whigs, it's important to consider the context. The early 1800s was a period of massive change in America. Think about it. Railroads, steamboats, telegraphs. It was a technological revolution, not unlike the digital revolution we're experiencing today. The Whigs were trying to navigate this wave of change and uncertainty, which probably contributed to their more reactive stance.
I see what you mean. It was a time of upheaval, and they were grappling with how to adapt to a rapidly changing world.
Exactly, and that struggle to adapt is something we see throughout the history of political parties. But just as the Democrats and Whigs seem to be settling into their roles, a new and incredibly divisive issue emerged that would completely reshape the political landscape: slavery.
Ah, yes, the issue that tore the nation apart. And I'm guessing it wasn't exactly a unifying force for the Whigs either.
You guessed right. The debate over slavery exposed deep divisions within the Whig Party. Some members were staunchly anti-slavery, while others were more sympathetic to the South's position. This internal conflict ultimately led to the party's demise.
So out of the ashes of the Whigs, a new party arises. The Republicans, right?
Precisely. But here's the thing that often gets overlooked. The Republicans weren't initially abolitionists. Their main goal was to contain the spread of slavery, believing it would eventually die out on its own.
Interesting. So they weren't demanding immediate emancipation, but they saw slavery as a problem that needed to be addressed.
Exactly. And this actually ties back to something we discussed earlier, the Founding Fathers. Many of them, like Washington and Franklin, were slaveholders in their youth. But as they grew older, their views evolved, and they became increasingly critical of the institution.
Wow, you're right. I hadn't thought of that connection. So the seeds of anti-slavery sentiment were sown even back then.
Absolutely. There were early cracks in the foundation of slavery, even before the rise of the Republican Party. Think about states like Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Rhode Island abolishing slavery in the 1780s, or courts in Massachusetts and New Hampshire declaring it illegal. These were early signs that the tide was turning against slavery.
It's fascinating to see how those early challenges to slavery paved the way for the Republican Party's stance a generation later. But wait, hold on. Before we move on to the Republicans' rise, didn't another interesting party pop up on the scene? The Know-Nothings, right? That name always makes me chuckle.
Ah, yes, the Know-Nothings. Their official name was the American Party, but their secrecy and evasiveness, especially when it came to their anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic platform, earned them that nickname.
Spill the tea. What were they all about, and why were they so secretive about it?
Well, it's tough to say for certain. The two-party system has shown remarkable resilience over the centuries, adapting to countless challenges and transformations, but the pressures are mounting. The dissatisfaction is palpable.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're at a crossroads. So much of what we've discussed today, the rise of parties from divisive issues, the struggles to balance competing interests within those big coalitions, the constant tension between the outsiders and the establishment, it all feels incredibly relevant right now.
You hit the nail on the head. Those historical patterns we've explored are echoing in our current political landscape. Take immigration, for example. It fueled the rise of the know-nothings in the 1850s, and it remains a potent and divisive issue today. While the specifics might have shifted, the underlying anxieties about cultural change and economic competition persist.
It's wild how some things never really change, huh? But it's not just immigration. That struggle to balance competing interests within each party is another recurring theme. Back then, Van Buren was a master at holding together this diverse coalition of Northerners and Southern slaveholders. Today, both parties are grappling with similar challenges.
Absolutely. The Democrats are constantly navigating the tensions between their progressive wing and more moderate voters, and the Republicans are trying to bridge the divides between social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, and the populist wing of the party. It's a constant balancing act.
It's like they're walking a tightrope trying to keep everyone happy without falling off. And then there's that whole dynamic of us versus them, the outsiders, against the establishment. It seems to be woven into the fabric of American politics.
It's a powerful narrative that's been used throughout history to mobilize voters. Politicians tap into that sense of shared identity, that feeling of being left behind or ignored by those in power. It's a strategy that resonates deeply with people. But here's where things get really interesting. We're starting to see signs that those old categories, those traditional dividing lines are blurring.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that? Are you saying that the two-party system is finally starting to crack?
It's too early to say for sure, but there are definitely some intriguing developments. Just look at the record low approval ratings for both Biden and Trump. It suggests a growing disillusionment with the establishment, a sense that neither party truly represents the interests of everyday Americans.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling out there that the system is broken, that it's not working for the people it's supposed to serve.
And this dissatisfaction has created an opening of space for new voices and new ideas to emerge. Remember, throughout history, periods of upheaval have often led to the rise of new political movements. Teddy Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party was a product of its time, just like the Know-Nothings and the Republicans before them.
So you're saying that this current moment of political unrest could be a catalyst for change, a chance for something new to break through.
It's certainly possible. We're seeing a surge of interest in alternative models and electoral reforms that could create a more level playing field and give a voice to those who feel marginalized by the two-party system.
That makes me think about those reforms we talked about earlier, like ranked choice voting and proportional representation. Do you think those could actually gain traction and lead to real change?
It's hard to predict the future, but the fact that these ideas are being seriously debated is a sign that the conversation is shifting. People are looking for alternatives, for ways to make the system more responsive to their needs and aspirations.
So as we head into this crucial election year, what should we be paying attention to? What are the key things that will tell us whether the two-party system is truly at a turning point?
We'll keep an eye on how these themes we've been discussing play out in the campaign. Watch how the parties navigate their internal divisions, how they appeal to voters' anxieties and aspirations, and whether they offer genuine solutions to the challenges facing the nation.
I feel like we have this historical lens now, a way to see the deeper currents beneath the surface of the political drama.
Exactly. And by understanding the historical context, by recognizing the recurring patterns and dynamics, you'll be better equipped to make sense of the political landscape, to cut through the noise and make informed decisions.
So to our listener, as you navigate this election year and beyond, remember the lessons we've uncovered today. Think about how these historical forces are shaping the political landscape. Ask yourself, what are the key issues dividing the parties today, and how do they connect to those historical patterns? Who are the different groups within each party, and how are their interests clashing? And perhaps most importantly, how are politicians appealing to voters' sense of identity and belonging? And how does this resonate with those historical narratives of us versus them?
By asking these questions, you'll gain a deeper understanding of the forces at play, the motivations behind the rhetoric, and the potential consequences of the choices we make as a nation.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's amazing how looking back at history can help us understand the present and even glimpse into the future. Thanks for taking us on this journey.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, history is not just a collection of facts and dates. It's a living narrative, a story that continues to unfold, and we all have a role to play in shaping its next chapter.